Your current affairs program, Citizens Hour, is now more inclusive, more educative, and brings you a broader perspective on political and governance matters. This quarter on Citizens Hour, we spotlight issues on democracy, civic education, women and youth participation in governance, and other policy issues. Every Saturday, starting at 10 a.m. and a repeat broadcast at 6 p.m. on West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM, Dakar. Also, don't miss our special monthly debate, which comes up every last Saturday of the month on trending political and governance issues in the sub-region. Citizens Hour on West Africa Democracy Radio. It's your time to speak. Citizens Hour on West Africa Democracy Radio. It's your time to speak.
Hello and welcome to Citizens Hour, supported by the National Endowment for Democracy NED on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM in Dakar. I am Veronica Njai. We're also streaming live on our digital platforms. You can join the conversation by sending your message or reactions on WhatsApp on +221 78 5421. Now, across West Africa and the Sahel, several countries are currently facing complex political and security challenges, from terrorism and violent extremism to armed conflict and political instability. Governments across the region continue to grapple with the difficult responsibility of protecting citizens and restoring security. However, as states intensify their security responses, concerns continue to grow over the protection of human rights, civic freedoms, and the rule of law. This brings us to our discussion today. How can governments fight insecurity while ensuring that human rights and the rule of law are protected? Are security measures sometimes creating new grievances that can undermine long-term stability? And what mechanisms are needed to ensure accountability during periods of transition? To discuss this topic, I'm joined by my guest, Charles Mambu, chairman of the Coalition of Civil Society and Human Rights Activists in Sierra Leone. I also have Adib Sani, security analyst and executive director of the Jati Center for Human Security and Peace Building based in Ghana, and also Abdou Mane, who is a human rights lawyer with the National Human Rights Commission of the Gambia, is expected to join us, as well as David Asante Dako, who is a research analyst at the West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, WADR. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Veronique.
Good.
All right, great to have you for this conversation. Hopefully, we will have a great conversation. Okay, so to begin the conversation, I'll start with you, Mr. Mambu. From a civil society perspective, what are some of the most common human rights concerns that emerge during periods of political transition?
Thank you very much. Let me say good morning to my colleagues in West Africa and, if possible, beyond. As you have had my introduction, I am Charles Mambu, Chairman, Coalition of Civil Society and Human Rights. I've been an human rights activist and human rights expert for the last 25 to 30 years, working on issues of human rights, democracy and security in West Africa and also around Africa and beyond. Thank you very much. I think the human rights issues are critical issues when it comes to transitions, because during a transitional period, these are the periods where we have a lot of insecurity and a lot of human rights violations. The most common human rights violations that we have been recording, during transition and insecurity period are actually the unwarranted killing and destruction of properties, especially livelihood of citizens in a particular country or a region. We also have abuses like sexual abuse, child labor, hunger, where armed men, mostly some of them may also become government security officers, as well as civil defense forces and other insurgent groups may also use human beings as human shield, and this may expose them to hunger, it may expose them to diseases, and eventually it may also expose them to be killed by opposite forces, across the area. Again, another critical human rights violations that have been recorded are also infractions, because during this period, rule of law in some cases may be suspended as a result of the conflict, as a result of the transitional conflict, as a result of the fact that a lot of the government may not obey their very constitutional order that describes and defines the critical accountable rule of law system. Some of them, if not most, may also not follow the principles of rule of law, and accountability may be very, very also limited. In an area where you have a very powerful military, like we have in some West African countries, some of the commandos and commanders, leadership of those military, especially the official government ministry, may also find it very, very difficult to control their men in arms, because some of them may do a lot of human rights violations against civilians and the very people that they are being trained, they are being supported, and they are being catered for to protect, in those areas. Some of the military officials may not be trained in human rights laws and regulations, and where some may be during the transition and during conflict, they may also tend to disobey the very principles of human rights, rule of law, and accountability for which they have been trained. So these are just some of them, some very, very critical. Of course, all of them are accumulated as a result of the fact that you have an uncontrolled use of arms and ammunitions. We have neighboring countries. You have people, some of them may be even outside West Africa, where their own means of making money is through insurgencies, is through insecurity, especially a period of transition. So we have a lot of uncontrolled and unaccountable armed dealers that will actually be sending arms and ammunition into a conflict zones. We also have, as a result of the very poverty, lack of educations, lack of employment of 80 to 90% of the country youths, this may be used and misused to handle guns. You have transnational drug dealers, from across the region and across the world, that may also have a flourishing market to supply arms and ammunition and drugs, which the various insurgents, the various military will also be using so that they can carry out their attacks on civilians, violating their human rights at all costs, without any accountable measures, during the course of bringing situations under control. So we have a combinations of a lot of factors, in-country factor, we have external country, we have border-related factors that all cumulated into grave violations of human and people's rights, which has actually all of them against the country charter, the country constitution, and the African Union Charter on Peoples and Human Rights. So just to give an opening, I think these are some of the key grave human rights violations and situations that arises during the course of insurgencies and during the course of transition in West Africa.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Mambu. Sorry, that was a variety of violations that you listed there. I am aware that we are also now being joined by David Asante Dako, who is also working with WADR, the West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network. Welcome, Mr. David. All right.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So now to you, Mr. Sani. Looking at this perspective, I mean, from a security perspective, why do governments often adopt stronger security measures during periods of crisis?
Well, thank you so much for having me. A very good morning from Ghana to my co-panelist. Mr. Mambo has said a lot, and he's actually addressed a lot of the issues that I had in mind. During transition periods, it is tantamount to getting caught between a rock and a hard place. There are terrorist groups, transnational criminal networks, secessionists who would want to take advantage of the transition period to wreak havoc. Just as it is happening in the Sahel region. According to the Global Terrorism Index, for 2 years running, the region is notorious for over 50% of terrorist attacks all across the globe. 50% of it happens in the Sahel region. And for countries such as Mali, they have to deal with different terrorist groups, including Jamaa al-Nusra al-Islami wal-Muslimin and other affiliates. Burkina Faso is also having to grapple with them, then Niger, because according to statistics, 95% of the terrorist attacks that happen within West Africa happen in Nigeria, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. And it is particularly there when the political system is in transition. Also, the transition government would also have to contend with ensuring that nobody takes advantage of the system, of the weak nature of the system to overthrow the government. As a result, they would have to contend with domestic political adversaries as well. So whilst they are fighting on the right, they are fighting on the left, and it becomes very difficult for them. In Mali, for instance, the Azawad and some other terrorist groups have become so powerful to the extent that they have gone beyond just attacks in central Mali, and they are able to effectively stage attacks in northern Burkina Faso and northern Benin as well. So it is a matter of grave concern for us within the sub-region, especially also in Ghana and other countries at the coastal areas, because these groups are becoming powerful. They are taking advantage of the weak nature of transition regimes. A transition regime cannot be as strong as a normal regime. That is why they've always had to deal with these threats. Unfortunately, for years on end, the approach by these governments, I must say, to some extent, hasn't been so helpful. In some cases, the operations are not intelligence-led, they are not necessary, they are not legal, and a lot of human rights violations happen. And let me say unequivocally that terrorist groups always take advantage of civilians getting caught in the government fire as a recruiting or recruitment mechanism. All right. So that is why it is critical that despite the myriad of plethora of security challenges transitional regimes face, they have to be mindful of the fact that any civilian killed as a result of their operations is strengthening these terrorist groups.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Sunny. That was a great explanation. I'm also aware that we are now also joined by Mr. Mane, who is also a human rights lawyer in the Gambia. Welcome, Mr. Mane.
Thank you very much, Veronique.
Okay, thank you so much.
Pleasure to join you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mane, for the purpose of this conversation, we would really appreciate it if you can have your camera on, because we're also streaming live on our social media platforms. Thank you so much. So to you, Mr. Dako, across West Africa, several transition governments came to power in contexts marked by insecurity and public frustration. How has this environment affected human rights and democratic governance in the region?
Good. So, like you rightly pointed out, we have had many of these transitioning governments, coming on at a period where we have, some really strong human rights violations. And the interesting thing is, many of these governments actually came owing to a result of, lack of accountability over the years in their respective countries. And the challenge with their coming is that the context within which they find themselves also makes it very difficult to, enforce or exact accountability from these very governments. And I always say that when it comes to democracy, a democracy isn't about being able to, vote or, being able to cast a ballot. The democracy actually comes into play when we have gone to the ballot and now we have to be able to input or participate in governance. That's where the challenge comes in. And while you can give these governments some amount of credit, but then if governance is supposed to be participatory and we find that increasingly you are clamping down on people's right to participate in governance and in politics, it begs questions about the sort of governance that is being delivered. So increasingly, we are seeing a clampdown on the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression, and in many cases, the freedom of association. This has been noticed in the AES and even Guinea, even currently as we speak, because there's been a heavy clampdown on the political scene in Guinea. And we also have the new entrant into the field, that's Guinea-Bissau. The one trend that runs through in all these cases is that clamp down on the freedoms of expression, of association, and of speech. And we are also increasingly seeing the clamp down on political parties. It's a very dicey situation because on the one hand, military operations call for, some level of exclusivity as far as information is concerned. But how do you, navigate that tightrope between security and the freedoms that people are guaranteed by the Constitution? That has been the major challenge we have seen in the countries transitioning in the sub-region lately. And it's also become very hard to distinguish between a situation where a government or a military government can be said to be clamping down on rights and a situation where they can be, enforcing security. That challenge always comes up in many of these cases that we are seeing. But there are times that the military government clearly goes overboard. So there was this incident where one journalist in the AES criticized Dumboya. That was sometime last year or so. And he said Dumboya was allowing French, what do you have it? The French military into Guinea and granting French too much access. Now this journalist was punished. And I found that very interesting because one of the highlights of the campaigns by the AES has been their relationship with France or their anti-France campaign. So how then does a person who criticizes a junta that is supposed to be aligning with you, end up in jail? At that point, there seems to be some kind of incoherence. So, yeah, it's a very tight situation that we have on our hands. That is aside the usual human rights issue that you could, on any given day, attribute to the economic situation that the sub-region has been in since, the advent of democracy in the 1990s. And, the issue of climate change and, the natural disasters that we have to contend with. So these governments and the insecurity with which the countries are faced have complicated and, aggravated the challenges that we have in the sub-region significantly.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. David. Mr. Mane, I'll bring you in now. From a legal perspective, what principles should governments employ when responding to insecurity? You're muted. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Veronique. It's a pleasure to join your program. Regardless of the situation, be it times of conflict or insecurity, whatever the state does must be anchored on rule of law. And basically, there has to be the principle of legality in the sense that whatever action must be justified basically by the law. The fact that countries are facing insecurity does not mean that there is a trade-off between security and law. In fact, they are complementary in that case. So,
Mr. Mane, is it possible that you speak up a bit? We are struggling to hear you.
okay, are you hearing me now?
Yes, please.
Is it better?
Yes.
Okay, I said regardless of whether in terms of emergency, heightened insecurity, or during conflict, human rights basically have to be respected in any case. So that means that actions of governments must be grounded in law. So the principle of legality basically applies. So these rights are not derogable. Of course, some of them could be limited, but to a large extent, from international human rights law perspective, a number of these rights still exist, and there should be no discrimination, basically, in the way and manner in which those operations are to be done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mane. Mr. Sunny, I'll get back to you. I really appreciate the perspective that you brought regarding the Sahel, as that's the region mostly affected as we speak in West Africa. Governments often argue that extraordinary security threats, like in the case we are seeing in the Sahel, like you cited, require extraordinary measures. Where should the line be drawn between legitimate security action and violations of rights?
Well, in 2022, there was a military operation in Mora, in Mali, in which, according to the UN, over 500 people were killed. And in Burkina Faso, at a point, government gave arms to civilians called the VDPs, Volunteers for the Protection of the Homeland, to fight the terrorists. Unfortunately, these civilians operated like the terrorists. They were targeting persons, especially of Fulani extraction, and engaging in gross human rights violations. I must say, that was a unique opportunity for groups such as Jenim to recruit a lot of young people from the Fulani extraction, even from Ghana. A gentleman called Abu Tujana joined ranks in the Sahel, and later, I understand, blew himself up in a suicide operation. So there is the need for us to be very mindful of the legalities involved in fighting terrorism. And let us also be mindful of the fact that fighting terrorism with guns alone doesn't solve the problem. In my opinion, I know this is a matter of contest, okay? There is no military solution to any problem in any part of the world. I mean, America has fought the Taliban for so many years. In the end, they had to withdraw. Look at the case of Iraq or even Syria. So in as much as sometimes you would have to flex your muscles, we need to address those deep-seated socioeconomic and geopolitical issues in these communities, issues of human rights, issues of protecting minorities, addressing the needs, the basic needs of the people, such as access to water, access to food, shelter, medical services, etc. That is extremely critical, and that is the surest, most sustainable way to fight terrorism in West Africa. But let me also add that there is the need for accountability. When your soldiers go to a village and decide to massacre, you should hold them to account. If you don't hold them to account, you confuse the population because they ask themselves, who is the enemy? Who is the foe? Is the government the enemy? Is the government the foe? Okay, so by ensuring accountability, it helps. And also, intelligence-led operations, I think to some extent, helps to protect human rights. If you don't have good intelligence, and you go into a community, you might just target innocent people. I'm sure you might have heard about the story of the Mauritanian who traveled to his home country, Mauritania, for a wedding. Unfortunately, due to wrong intelligence, he was arrested by the Mauritanian authorities and handed over to the Americans, who took him to Guantanamo Bay and tortured him for close to 2 decades, only for them later to say, I think we got the wrong guy. Okay, so all of these should be taken into consideration in as much as it is important to show the terrorists some level of force, so we are able to reverse their gains. But if you ask me today, whether indeed, as West Africans, we have made gains so far as fighting terrorism is concerned, I am sorry to say, and I'm sure maybe someone might disagree with me, we haven't really made gains, considering the lands, the area these terrorists have seized, how powerful they have become, how lethal they have become. I don't think we are winning the war against terrorism. And one of it is the fact that we haven't really paid attention to the issues of human rights.
Oh, I thank you very much, Mr. Sunny. You did say we haven't made gains as a region when it comes to fighting terrorism. Okay, I guess maybe it might be debated, but okay, let's bring in Mr. Mambu here. Mr. Mambu, obviously you heard the things that Mr. Sunny has mentioned, and I would just want to ask, when citizens experience abuses like the ones that you mentioned when we started the program, the varieties of violations that citizens are prone to in times of crisis or insecurity, how does this affect trust between communities and the state?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Let me just comment a bit before I go to there from my the previous speaker. Definitely, West Africa have made gains in terms of fighting insecurity and insurgency. if you look at the history of Boko Haram in northern Nigeria, their aim actually was to have a state on their own, and later on they can even rule the whole of Nigeria. For more than almost 2 decades now, they could not actually able to achieve that aim, and the Nigeria government, the Nigeria military, backed up by community people, have been able to largely restrain them to the Borno states, and some of the other nearby communities. So I think that gains has also been made. If we look at the Al Qaeda West Africa, who are actually operating in the Sahel region, their aim also, starting from Mali, northern Mali, when they actually join hand with the Tuareg rebels, their ultimate aim is to get hold of the entire Republic of Mali government, and to rule it so that they can have legitimacy to expand their activities to other parts of West Africa. That again has not been totally met by them. They have caused a lot of atrocities, in those regions. But yet still, the resilience of the majority of the Malians and the Sahel region are actually repairing them, despite recently we have an information of them penetrating into the Malian capital, Bamako. But even at that, they were also taken away. If you look at Central Africa, you look at Chad, there was a time when the insurgents even have to attack the capital, in order to overthrow the government. Unfortunately, with the combination and support from countries like Nigeria, the French, the United States Army, and others, they were actually able to repel them and restrict them to the border area. Yes, they are continuing to cause havoc in those areas, but by and large, I think we are seeing a lot of gains means in those areas. There is no one country of the 16 countries in West Africa that is under the total rule of any of these insurgencies, even from Boko Haram to Al Qaeda, West Africa, to the Tuareg rebels, and the rest of who they are actually not be able to capture any of the city and at this time. So we are making gains, but those gains are also at the detriment of civilian total human rights violations, because, like I said earlier, those fighting forces from both sides. And in most of these cases, also, you have a civil militias, that are supporting either by true intelligence or in terms of carrying arms and ammunition. But above all, most of them also are carrying their own arms, taking arms against the rebel as civil defense forces. There have been a lot of casualty, a lot of human rights violations, which has also been attributed to their actions. And some of them are totally unconstitutional and unwarranted. However, accountability measures are very, very low in those areas. Unlike what we saw in Sierra Leone, I think Sierra Leone is a better example in West Africa and the world at large, which I think the world will actually have to come again to study Sierra Leone. Some of us have gone as consultants in terms of sharing the best practices of Sierra Leone. We have gone to places like South Sudan. I've had discussions with authorities there and a lot of other colleagues in that country and other warring countries. We've been to Tigray in northern Ethiopia. We've been to Eritrea, just to share some of the experiences of Sierra Leone. Because here we have one of the most grievous human rights violations that took place during our civil war from 1991 to 2002. Yet still, after that war, with support from West Africa, led by Nigeria, and the UN and ECOWAS as a whole, we were able to put in an accountability measures where a special court was established for Sierra Leone, and that court was able to bring some of the most grievous causes of violations during this war. But let me disclose this. I will tell you this, as I am talking to you, some of our guys who actually perpetrated the most heinous crime human rights crime in Sierra Leone, who are now in Rwanda. A lot of them are in touch with me almost on a daily basis, pleading that we should mount a campaign to get our government understand for them, A, to be released, B, to be sent back to their country so that they can continue to serve their sentences, their remaining sentences. We are currently led by the coalition of civil society, engaging the residual special court in Sierra Leone and other judicial and justice system, both at local and international, to see whether this is a possibility. You know, of course, our government have its own take on it. So Sierra Leone transition and method of addressing accountability actually works well, not only for Sierra Leone, but across the sub-region. Had it not been for the Special Court of Sierra Leone, former president of Liberia, Chancellor, would still have been in Liberia, causing a lot of havoc in that country after he was arrested and sent to Hague, tried, and now serving his 50-year or more sentence in Hague. We have a transition, a democratic transition government actually taking place in Liberia, you know, for the last 20 or more years. And Liberia, as Sierra Leone, extremely peaceful, you know, changing government from administration, from one administration to another without using a single bullet in those areas. So I think Sierra Leone example in terms of ensuring accountability for those that committed the grievous crime against human dignity and human livelihood is one that all of us, you know, we have to copy and let it be something that ECOWAS, you know, the AU and UN will actually have to, you know, pass into law. You know, that Sierra Leone example will have to be followed in any of these countries where insurgencies and transitional systems are currently taking place. You know, like I said, in the Sahel regions, in the northern part of Nigeria, the Boko Haram and a lot of things. So by the time those insurgencies ends, and I'm sure they will end one day, if possible very soon, those leaders will have to bear the consequences of their actions.
All right. Mr. Sani, do you have any rebuttals? Because I can see a lot of reactions from you. I'm not sure if there's anything you want to say before I move on.
Well, the thing is, as to whether we are winning or losing, I know it's a matter of context. Okay, a lot of terrorists have been destroyed. A lot of their leaders have been targeted and successfully neutralized. But now they have become so audacious that they have gone beyond attacking, for example, central Mali, to even staging attacks in the capital. Recently, you and I know what happened with the defense minister in Mali. He was killed. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so we need to look at it from a very holistic perspective. I mean, the need for us to bring together both the kinetic and the non-kinetic measures. I know my colleagues would want to have their say also, so I wouldn't take too much of the time. Let's move on.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Sani. I know you did try to bring in the perspective of the case of Mali, where the defense minister was killed. But now we would also look at these cases, especially when it comes to civil society, the civic space in these countries, the arrest of journalists, press freedom, and all of that. But before that, I'll bring in Mr. Asante. Mr. Asante, can the weakening democratic safeguards in the name of security create longer-term governance problems in the region, in your opinion?
Definitely. Because for starters, this is the issue. Every time these juntas, are challenged regarding the way they are conducting governance in their respective countries, they revert to the security situation. As far as they are concerned, the security situation is justification for all the human rights violations and atrocities that are being conducted under their supervision. So in a context like that, one is compelled to ask, given that these juntas have shown a desire to maintain themselves in power, what motivation or incentive do they have to actually ensure that someday, and rather sooner than later, this insurgency is eradicated? There doesn't seem to be much motivation on their part if it's a purpose of keeping. Challenge has always been, pointed out. Again, the presence of the juntas in the sub-region is also emboldening their immediate. So you would realize this that are being adopted by the leaders in.
Mr. Asante, we are struggling to.
So-called, democratic dispensations are. Whoa. Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes, the network is a bit poor from your end.
Good, but you can hear me now, I hope.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Good. So I'm saying increasingly, because of the challenge we have in the juntas, the leaders in the sub-region, in the so-called democratic, countries, are beginning to adopt the methods that are used by these juntas. So there have been times where, you read from certain analysts and then they ask, what is actually the difference between what is happening in, say, Benin, right? And what is happening in Cote d'Ivoire? And, what is happening in the AES? You have a situation where each leader has, by some means, hogged all the power and is perpetuating himself in power. So, and they are using the very same methods, clamping down on the very same rights which are being clamped down on in the transition countries. We are seeing civil society and human rights defenders being clamped down on in the democratic countries, the very same way they are being clamped down on in the transition countries. And you also get some of these democratic countries, instituting laws which actually prohibit any kind of criticism of the government, just as is being done in the transition countries. Benin recently, put in a law which prevents you from criticizing them for the entire duration of a term, a presidential term, save the last year. So the more we have these kinds of countries and the more they ignore the human rights element and centralize their relationships on the economic, the more these human rights challenges are bound to, perpetuate and continue to undermine democracy. But the challenge, again, is ECOWAS initially was supposed to be a purely economic arrangement. The only reason why democracy and human rights and all these other virtues came to be a concern was because we realized they were posing an impediment to the economic agenda. So now that you have these human rights and democracy issues being increasingly undermined and being increasingly done away with, it's a reversal of the progress, either way you look at it, because the democracy is going to foster the instability, which is also then going to undermine the economic gains that have been made. I mean, we have already seen it with the, the breakaway of the AES from the ECOWAS. And we have people like the president in Togo playing this game where they've now wedged themselves between the ECOWAS and the AES. So he gets to maintain all the, the authoritarian excesses, but at the same time gets to align himself with ECOWAS, which supposedly is the, the more democratic of the two regional blocks that we have in the sub-region at the moment. So it is a very, complex situation that we have on our hands. And the jihadist element too is creating a very interesting situation. We are increasingly beginning to see these jihadist elements aligning themselves with government. That's the part that's challenging, because you take a case like Mali and Nigeria. There have been suspicions that some of these, cases where you have jihadists ransacking military barracks and, taking their weapons and ammunition are actually, being orchestrated. There are conspiracies between the military and the jihadist element. And there have been instances in Nigeria where we have people who have been on the terrorism watch list for decades, posing for pictures with the president. That's as high up as, these elements are able to engage with government. So it becomes an even more complex situation when you have the very elements that are supposed to be opposed by virtue of where they stand on human rights, or where we expect them to stand on human rights, actually being seen to be aligned. So that creates a situation where you have these military regimes increasingly finding cause to maintain themselves, because we have a situation where they were actually brought into being significantly owing to the instability caused by these jihadists. So where you have all the actors seemingly now aligning, it becomes a very difficult, because as a citizen, you don't even know any longer who is full and who is. Add to that the challenge of the corruption that has been going on in the military, because there is this belief that one of the reasons that incited the coup in Niger was the fact that some faction of the military were being investigated for corruption. Under the Chiani government, there have been reports of further incidents of corruption. So in this situation, you realize that the very elements that are supposed to are not, putting themselves in the best light. But I think one challenge that stands out is how to handle the jihadists. Where exactly do we place them, in the annals of history? Because we have tried the issue of trying to reconcile them, integrate them into society. And we must be frank, those efforts have not been perfect. Because in Nigeria, for example, you had instances where they were not being paid and they reverted back to their terrorist selves. But if in such a situation, you also say we should excuse them. Okay, yeah, they erred. So in order to bring all this instability to an end, let's welcome them back into the fold. What incentive does that then give them to, end their atrocities. So the challenge is very complex, and the more it gets drawn out, the more it feeds itself.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. David. Mr. Mane, I'll bring you in now. That was a very interesting perspective that Mr. David brought in, that human rights issues don't only exist in times of transitions, but also that some democratic governments are guilty of the same things. We'll get into that more during the conversation. But Mr. Mane, what legal protections should citizens have during security operations, especially in conflict-affected areas?
Thank you. You mean the legal safeguards, right?
Yes, please.
So I think the legal safeguards range from judicial safeguards to institutional safeguards as well as operational safeguards. The UN Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy emphasizes that respect for human rights and rule of law is one of the four pillars of an effective counter-terrorism response. So we've seen that a number of operations do occur, but whether some of these operations are in line with the requirements of the law. It is important for citizens to have front access to uh, uh, courts and also judicial review of detentions where they occur. And they should be able to have access to lawyers and legal aid, and also there should be fair trial guarantees because the courts would serve as the last bastion of hope for the people. So if people are not able to have those judicial safeguards, then there is a problem. Also, independent institutions, particularly national human rights commissions, parliamentary oversight, because usually be it state of emergency or some other exceptional security measures. These are usually provided for in the constitutions, which allow for the state to use certain set of force, but also it's kind of put safeguards and as to when it could start, how it should work, and also how it could be terminated. But we've seen that sometimes these could be used as tools to kind of suppress on the liberties and the rights of journalists, human rights defenders, and ordinary people. So, ombudsmen, their complaint mechanisms, and also parliamentary oversight is quite essential. But also for the security institutions or the operators, it's important that they have inbuilt human rights training for their officers to make them understand the standards and so that the detention procedures would be clear and in line with the law, so that there will be clear rules of engagement. Because when there is no accountability mechanisms at the level of the operators, it would certainly be a room for more human rights violations to occur.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Mane. You mentioned accountability and accountability mechanisms. And I know that Mr. Mambo did speak a lot about accountability during his last submission. So, Mr. Mambo, I'll bring you in now because you did speak a lot about the fact that these people should be accountable. So, what precise or specific accountability mechanisms should exist when security forces are accused of abuses? Mr. Mambo, if you could please mute so that we could hear you. Unmute, I mean. Mr. Mambo, you can kindly unmute and go ahead. You're muted.
Can I come in as we wait for Mr. Mambo?
Okay.
I think it's
okay. Thank you very much. One of the greatest accountability measures is to ensure that whoever commit a or any kind of human rights violations against people, should be brought before the rule of law. And that is an established court system as defined in a democratic state. within the constitution of that country, because that is the universal acceptance mechanism, to try people and to let people be actually accountable. Any of those people should also not be protected by the states or by the leadership of the military, for instance, the security sector and the rest of all the agencies within the security sector. They should not be protected at any level and by all costs. They must be allowed to go through the judicial system, the investigation, the trial, and in an event they are found wanted or they are found guilty, they actually have to be punished according to the laid down principles, are defined defined by the constitutions and appropriate, to the crime they must have been committed, for which they will be found guilty. So that one is extremely very important. This is important because in most cases, human rights perpetrators and violators are protected by their leadership and in some cases by the state. And in this case, we are not just talking about the established constitutional and military, in terms of insurgencies and in terms of insecurity, either within a country or within West Africa and beyond. We normally see an emergence of a lot of civil organizations, people, institutions coming, claiming to be providing support to the military and the government of Sierra Leone. And in some cases, if not most, some of these people have actually been legitimized, by both the leadership of the security sector and the state itself, which is unwarranted. You understand? Like I said earlier, during our civil war, we have a group from South Africa who actually came and said they are actually very much strong and perfect and have the knowledge for fighting the rebel wars. Unfortunately, they ended up becoming people that they are committing the greatest crime against humanity in our system. And some of them actually come for our economic gain. For instance, the diamonds, the golds, and the rest, because when they also come, some of these mercenaries, when they are brought in by the states through agreement between the state and their various military organ and security organ, they mostly go and secure those communities that are actually rich in minerals, actually rich in minerals. They will go there. So instead of securing the civilians and their property, they will only be securing area where they will get economic gain, and this gain, like we saw in Sierra Leone, actually benefited them and their cohorts in their various countries and some of the government officials and state officials that they may be actually working with. So this is very crucial for accountability. Accountability should not only be limited to those state institutions or state forces that may be committing human rights violations, but some of those mercenaries that may also be brought into the country, by the state, should also be held accountable. In this way, they must be allowed to face the rule of law, and there should be no pardon for each one of them. Each and everybody should be tried according to the law of that state, and which is very lacking in West Africa, in Africa, and by extension, the entire world. This is actually happening across the entire world. We see what is happening between the United States, Israel, and Iran. We are seeing the thousands, if not millions, of Palestinians that are being killed on a daily basis, and nobody is held accountable. We are seeing schools being bombed, which is against the international laws, of even the UN chapter on the protection and the right of people, across the world. But we are seeing all of them happening because those powers, those who have the economic giant, like the United States of America, the Israelis, the Iranians, and other parties, with people, government, institutions, despite the laid down principle, they look at these people, commit this heinous crime, and they go free because they will tell you these are superpower, these are people that our livelihood depends on. See what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. The amount of people that are being killed, the amount of human rights, children are being taken from war front, to concentration camp in each of these countries. Some of these things do also happen in West Africa, which is bad because some of these insurgents in West Africa are also taking homes, they are taking arms, they are getting drugs of all types from some of these countries across the world. Unfortunately, our international agreements, our international frameworks, starting from Manor Union, you go to the ECOWAS, you go to the AU, you go to the UN, are not strong enough to protect the weak, the women and children that continue to suffer in the hands of those that we are referring to, that they are our bread basket, because we depend on them for our bread. And when they are giving us this bread, the bread comes with machinery, it comes with drugs, it comes with arms and ammunition, which are actually flourishing the business of some of their tycoons and the business of the insurgency in West Africa, which is actually now become a dumping ground for drugs, trafficking, human rights violation, insurgencies, across the world. So that those are some of the peculiar things that we have found ourselves in West Africa. Why is it that our region is used as a dumping ground? The arms that are using, the insurgencies are using to commit these erroneous crimes are not manufactured by them. They are imported. Somebody somewhere is manufacturing them, but they are using our minerals within the various regions where they are operating, sell these minerals to some of the dangerous guys who prove to be businessmen and women to get hold of our minerals. And they return, our children, our women, and our community and infrastructure are being destroyed. We live in insecurity matter. Unfortunately, transition government could find it very, very difficult to protect human and people's rights. They will find it and that's what we are seeing in the Sahel region. When the three countries, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso left ECOWAS, they are now on their own, but they can even not fight, totally fight the insurgencies. They are now on their own, and they are building bilateral alliances with countries like Russia, countries like China and others, at the detriment of their people and the sub-region. You understand? So these are some of the problems that West Africa is actually grappling on. And we don't have a strong leader. We don't have a strong political and democratic leadership in West Africa that will actually say, no, enough is enough. Let's come together and address this issue once and for all. Even if it means taking on big countries like the United States, like Russia, like China and others that may be, knowingly or unknowingly in compliance with providing some of this illegal arms to some of these people through their process, across the sub-region and across Africa. It's extremely pathetic. We don't have that leadership in West Africa at the moment.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Mambu. You said a lot, but I'll bring in Mr. Sani. Mr. Sani, looking at the debate about ensuring human rights during periods of political transition, some debate that ensuring respect for human rights could weaken the security efforts. In your opinion, as a security analyst, can respect for human rights actually strengthen security efforts rather than weaken them?
Well, absolutely. My co-panelists have said a lot. And I would wish to add to the fact that when there is no accountability, security agencies lose legitimacy, which makes it very difficult for them to get even intelligence. Before anyone gives out intelligence, a credible one for that matter, to any government agency, they should have trusted them. So when you violate their rights, they rather become friends with the enemy. On several occasions, we have seen how terrorist groups occupy area. They are able to provide services that the central administration is not able to provide the people. They are able to institute a sort of jurisprudence that ensures some level of fairness and even care for the poor. And they are also able to impose taxes on the people. And for a lot of civilians, they see their societies or their communities even more organized under the terrorists than under the central administration. That is why it is important that we are able to harness our relationship with the civilians based on mutual trust and respect, so they are able to cooperate with us. Secondly, transitional governments would also have to act with some level of discretion so far as the use and abuse of martial laws or emergency powers are concerned. On a normal day, it would have to go through a process, including parliament. But in some cases, due to the exigency of the issue, the governments of the day decide to implement certain laws and take advantage of it to abuse the rights of the people. I think it is something we need to pay attention to. Also, there's a need for an active civil society space. Just recently, my center, the Center for Human Security and Peace Building, we were able to get the government to rescind on a decision we found as arbitrary. And it had to do with revoking the gun licenses of all legally acquired arms in Ghana. We thought it had to be done in accordance with the law and with due process taken into cognizance. And thankfully, because the government listens, they listen to us and they rescinded it. And I think it's a good sign. So democracy is not all about elections. It is about an active civil society space as well, which in my opinion, I think would help to a very large extent in bringing authorities' attention to any issue of abuses. Some few years ago, my center was very vociferous in calling for Ghana government to pay attention to the plight of the Fulbeys in the country, owing to the lessons we can learn from Burkina Faso, Mali, and other places. And also,
but Mr. Sani, talking about civil society, active civil society, we can also argue that in periods of transition, and especially in the Sahel as we see it, we cannot say that we are seeing an active civil society, can we? So where does that leave them?
It's almost non-existent. It's almost non-existent.
Yes. So where does...
And that is a matter of grave concern. So if really they are committed to ensuring good governance, democracy, the respect for the rule of law, and the respect for the rights of the ordinary people within that region, civil society becomes a very important function of the whole ecosystem. But without an active, not just a civil society space, an active civil society space, it becomes a difficult issue. And Veronique, let me also add the issue of volunteer fighters. We need to be careful about it. I do know sometimes in desperate situations, governments adopt desperate measures by giving arms to civilians with little or no training whatsoever. So when you do that, they might engage in abuses and would create a lot of disenchantment against the regime. That is when you have civilians siding or even shielding terrorists. So we need to re-look at this issue of volunteer fighters, because almost all the countries in the Sahel fighting terrorism have had to, in one way or another, engage volunteer fighters. And with the regular force too, they need to be trained on how to be human rights sensitive in whatever they do. When they even catch an enemy combatant and are able to effectively disarm him, and most importantly, he doesn't pose any threat to them, they are not in a position to summarily execute. It contravenes the Geneva Convention, and it is important that they are trained as to how to go about this in the face of danger or fighting. So I think that we've all recognized the fact that human rights does play a very critical role in our quest to counter the threat of terrorism in West Africa. And it is important that these regimes don't just concentrate on the kinetic approach of fight, bomb, or even kill, but rather to address those other deep-seated issues that confront the people, and that, of course, also creates that enabling environment for these terrorist groups to survive.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Sani. Mr. Asante, as we wrap up the program, what lessons should West Africa countries learn from current transitional experiences in West Africa?
Well, for starters, the one lesson that should cut across is the fact that the terrorism challenge, it doesn't belong to any one country alone. It is not limited to Burkina, Mali, or Niger. We must understand that if those countries are on fire, it is only a matter of time before they drift into what we want to believe are our very secure territories. Already, it is not very likely that there isn't any country, it's not likely that there is a country in West Africa which doesn't have nationals who are involved one way or the other in the terrorism insurgencies. Mr. Sani did mention the case of one Ghanaian who was known to have committed suicide. And that's not the only instance we've heard of Ghanaians, even though we are yet to record any terrorism threat in Ghana. Increasingly, the threat is evolving, especially with the terrorists taking over territories and governing them, building legitimacy. And that is one thing that we need to be very mindful of, because it is one thing dealing with a leader that you elected or one who came to power promising to correct a system that was already in tatters, and a different one dealing with a leader who comes to power, primarily by his own will. At least even military regimes do have some formal channels through which, they impose themselves. But the terrorists, they just appear one day and that is it. And when you have such a challenge that can easily spread across borders, the game that is being played by these leaders, where one day this one is kind of avoiding the other, and the conversation on security cooperation stalls, and then there's an attack, and then one country alone is fighting it, and the terrorists run across the borders to the neighboring countries. You see, it's not helping the fight. And it is a challenge that the region needs to step up and address. Because at the end of the day, if we have terrorist cells planted in every country, it is even going to pose a bigger challenge, because then who is going to be able to defend whom? Or who is going to be able to attend to whom? If we want to host meetings to discuss how to address the challenge, in which country will we be safe? So that is one thing that we need to address. And also, the leadership in the sub-region, in the more stable and more democratic countries, also need to understand that, you see, the authoritarian measures they keep adopting aren't necessarily going to make the region any more stable. Democracy is the preferred mode of governance in the sub-region for a specific reason. And the minute we deviate from that, we kind of incentivize all these, foreign actors to show up and also try to impose themselves on the system. So the message to these leaders should be to respect the constitutions they came to meet and to desist from what we've seen as the increasing attempt to manipulate it to stay in power. We've seen it in Cote d'Ivoire, we've seen it in Benin, we've seen it in Guinea-Bissau, but everyone seems to focus on the AES. And that only gives the other countries, the leeway to continue perpetrating their authoritarian excesses. So basically, that is the message that I want to send across. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. David. Mr. Mane, if there is one legal safeguard that governments in the Sahel across West Africa should never compromise, even in the face of serious security threats, what should it be and why? Mr. Mane, if you're here.
Thank you very much. I'm getting it very clearly. I think, like I said, the legal safeguard is that there should be no human rights violation, and therefore that means the courts, the judiciary should be allowed to operate.
Mr. Mane, if you could
usual.
kindly speak up, please.
So, like I said, one of the casualties of security operations is the rule of law, and I think in any case the rule of law must not be compromised. Instead, it should be inbuilt in security operations. So the independence of the judiciary, lawyers, journalists should not become victims of security operations. So I think constitutional safeguards should in fact be strengthened rather than weakened in the process.
All right, but if you would have a message to policymakers across the Sahel on protecting human rights, it would be these. What would the emphasis be, basically? Just one.
So for me, where states respect the rule of law, uphold due process, maintain judicial independence, and hold security actors accountable, public trust grows. Like my colleague said, when security are found to be violating human rights, legitimacy weakens. So where right violations occur with impunity, those violations often become recurring tools for very threats of governance. So I think security achieved at the expense of human rights violations is rarely sustainable. Lasting peace requires accountable institutions, respect for human dignity, and unwavering commitment to the rule of law.
All right.
So there should not be any trade-off between maintaining security and then rule of law becoming an afterthought. It weakens the process because it's at the very foundation.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mane. Mr. Mambu, if you could kindly unmute and finally, just under a minute, what should governments prioritize to ensure that security responses do not undermine human rights?
Well, the key thing here should be enforcement of the rule of law in an event a human right is being compromised by any of the security forces. And the second one will be proper training of all security sector agencies, both formal and informal, on the principle of rule of law and the protection of human dignity, even at the face of adverse insecurity within their very community. Thirdly, I think government itself, from the head of state or to the president must be very, very accountable to the people, because in selecting security sector forces to carry out a state functions, that may have the prospect of violating human rights, the leadership of the government, in this case, the president of the head of state, and the military or the defense ministers must be very, very cautious and focus on the issue of protecting human and people's rights at all costs, no matter the circumstances they may find themselves in.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Mambo. Finally, you, Mr. Sani, what practical reforms are needed within the security sector to improve accountability? Again, just under a minute as we wrap up.
Well, I have a closing message. I'm developing a report on sub-regional security, and I just want to read a short paragraph of it as my final statement. Excuse me. And it goes like, sustainable security is built not only through military strength, but through legitimacy, public trust, accountability, and accountable institutions as well, and respect for the rule of law. Good governments, governments may win battles through force, but they secure lasting peace through good governance. And that should be the order of the day.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Sani. What a way to end the program. And today's discussion has highlighted one of the biggest challenges facing West Africa and the Sahel, the need to protect citizens from insecurity while ensuring that the fight against insecurity does not undermine the very rights and freedoms that governments are meant to protect. Security and human rights should not be viewed as opposing objectives. A sustainable response to insecurity requires strong institutions, accountability, respect for the rule of law, and trust of the citizens. My sincere thanks to my guest, Mr. Charles Mamburada, Chairman of the Coalition of Civil Society and Human Rights Activists in Sierra Leone, David Asante Dako, a research analyst at the West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, WADEMOS, Adib Sani, security analyst and executive director of Jatike Center for Governance and Security in Ghana, and Abdul Mane, a human rights lawyer participating, and he works with the National Human Rights Center in the Gambia. Thank you so much, gentlemen. And that... All right, and that's how we wrap it. A sincere thanks to the technical department, Mustafa Sek and Maudo Juve. And I am Veronique Njai. Stay engaged, stay informed, stay safe.
WADR. You can listen to us on 94.9 FM in Dakar through our website, www.